Thank you very much. The next item of business is a statement by Richard Lochhead on universities and colleges supporting students to return home safely at the end of term. The Minister will take questions at the end of his statement, so there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on Richard Lochhead.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I last stood in front of Parliament at the end of September to make a statement about supporting students through the global pandemic. And today I want to provide a further update, specifically about supporting students to return home safely at the end of term for the festive holidays. It's important to set out why education in our colleges and universities is so important at this time as we live with COVID until a vaccine arrives. This is probably obvious to many, but worth reiterating in the context of balancing all the harms caused by this virus. Learning at college or university has a positive effect on students' personal development, their well-being and life chances. And it's crucial to our ability to develop trained professionals to support key services such as health and social care at this time. It's also important for our economic growth, particularly as we recover from the negative impacts of both COVID and Brexit, since it provides a pipeline of talent we need to continue to grow our country. I absolutely appreciate how difficult it might be at times to keep sight of this in the midst of this global pandemic. And I also appreciate how difficult it has been for our students, our staff, and all their efforts to make sure learning can continue throughout this pandemic and this year. The population as a whole has had to continuously adapt as Scotland responds to the crisis, and students, of course, are no exception. For some, this has been particularly tough, given it may be their first time away from home, or they may have come from other countries or had personal circumstances which have exacerbated any of the challenges presented to them. I remain very grateful to those students who have adjusted and have continued to strive to achieve the education they rightly deserve against the backdrop of the global pandemic. And again, I also want to thank the staff who have helped them get through this and achieve all of what they've achieved. After a tough start to the academic year, many, but by no means all, students wish to go home at the end of term to see their family and friends. Of the 240,000 students at Scottish universities, usually at this time of year, we are expecting between 60 and 80,000 to travel home at the end of term. Some college students will also travel, but in many cases smaller numbers. So that means around 160,000 to 180,000 won't change their term time address or household. This will include international and UK students electing to stay here over the holiday period, and students who commute from home, and care experience students, for instance, for whom university is home. This broad range in the estimates I just quoted reflects how challenging it is to predict student movement. That said, we are expecting a substantial number of people wishing to travel. As with large numbers within the population as a whole potentially travelling, this poses a potential risk of virus transmission. And our challenge is to look after the well-being of our students by enabling them to return home while keeping them and the rest of society safe, and to help them keep their loved ones safe and communities safe. This is no easy task, but we have considered it in detail. And today I am announcing the measures which will support students who choose to return home to do so safely. Firstly, student welfare is, of course, of paramount importance, and colleges and university students will receive early, clearly advice on how to stay safe. Those who choose to stay in university accommodation over the holiday period will be well supported. Secondly, there will be staggered and early departure, irrespective of the level the institution currently finds itself in terms of the current strategic framework. Universities will be asked to make any necessary adjustments to scheduling to ensure that in-person teaching and assessment ends early enough to allow students time to get home at the end of term. And I see that University of Scotland has highlighted just today the staggered dates for the end of in-person teaching at Scottish universities, which are from late November to mid-December, so they are not expecting a great surge of movement. Taking extra care is a third measure. We will advise any student who wants to return home for the end of term to voluntarily reduce their social mixing for 2 weeks before going home. This means going out only for essential reasons and exercise. This is the advice for all, but it's most vital to those students leaving from those areas where they are designated at higher levels for the strategic framework, and those who are returning to households with vulnerable family members. I'm sure students will want to make sure they can do all they can do to not take the virus back home with them. And testing is the fourth measure, and one that has been raised numerous times in the Chamber. Enabling easy access to testing for students with symptoms has already proved to be effective in controlling outbreaks. Now we will be including Scottish students in a UK-wide initiative to test some asymptomatic students prior to the end of term. And safe travel is the final measure in our plan, and we will see all college and university students travelling home. They will be given guidance on how to do so safely. This includes following public health advice and use of public transport, and where there might be issues with local public transport capacity, we will work with institutions and Transport Scotland to enable safe travel. We have also been working closely with the other administrations across the UK to enable students to return home safely wherever they live and study. And as you will all be aware, the UK and Welsh governments have also issued their largely similar plans today. We will continue to work across the UK in supporting students, but will do so with an emphasis on what is set out in our own strategic framework. We will also shortly publish a Q&A, more detailed guidance as well, on the Scottish Government website, which will set out more information on the steps we are announcing today. I have no doubt that the majority of students will want to act responsibly and will follow the measures that are being set out. But I do want to turn to testing. We recognise the particular concerns associated with students moving from one household to another for the winter break. And so, as an additional layer in our work to support a safer return home, we will be offering testing to students who are returning home. To do this, we will make use of a new COVID testing technology, lateral flow devices, which can provide a result in half an hour. These tests will work by detecting antigens from the virus that causes COVID-19. Although these tests are not as sensitive as the gold standard PCR tests we use for our main testing programme, they are able to identify a substantial proportion of cases and appear to be more sensitive when detecting people with the highest viral load, so potentially those who could be most infectious. In agreeing to set this in motion, we have quickly taken advantage of the latest advances in technology and capacity. We intend to offer testing on a voluntary basis to all students who are returning home based on local and logistical circumstances. That is, as previously indicated, between 60 and 80,000 students. But to be clear, precise numbers will obviously depend on how many choose to go home and whether they choose to take up the offer of a test. We are currently planning on the basis that 2 tests will be necessary, 5 days apart, with PCR confirmation for positives where appropriate. But that position may change as public health professionals and clinicians take into account the new evidence that's coming forward from England, where there's been a number of pilots. So what does this mean for our students? It's important to be clear about the fact that these tests and what they can and cannot do. We will be using them to test students to try and find COVID cases, so that these students are asked to isolate so they don't transmit the disease further, and so that their close contacts are asked to isolate so that they too don't transmit the disease on if they've become infected. These tests provide a point-in-time assessment of whether a person has COVID, so they are useful for finding cases. But they cannot tell us with certainty that someone is COVID-free. They cannot tell us whether or not a person is incubating the disease. So we are asking students in Scotland to get tested and to isolate if positive or a close contact to help us reduce transmission. This means that it will be vital for students to continue to follow all the other measures in place to reduce transmission risks, even if they test negative. Guidance for students on what test results mean and the support available for them will be provided. The testing will be delivered through partnership with the Scottish universities and collaborating with the wider UK Government testing programme. We're all aware of the challenges surrounding establishing this system in such a short timescale, but we are absolutely committed to working in partnership to deliver this for our students. Supporting students to return home is only part of the equation. What happens in semester 2 is the other key part. While colleges and universities have supported students in their learning to date, it has been far from a normal experience. This was not helped by the outbreaks of COVID-19 within student accommodation at the start of term. During this period, working extensively with universities, NUS and other partners, processes were put in place to support student wellbeing. Work was also undertaken to communicate key messages, including explanations on how the current restrictions and social gatherings apply to students living away from home. Infection rates in student accommodation is now substantially reduced, with all known positive cases among university students since the start of term estimated to be around 1.5%. Data from the November the 5th shows that new cases among students identified each day by universities, based on the average of the previous 7 days, accounted for approximately 2% of the national total over the same period. So while we no longer have the same level of infections among students we saw at the start of term, we of course have to learn from that experience. There are many challenges in determining the approach to balancing the 4 harms to support students' education in semester 2. This is set within the context of considerable uncertainty around virus levels at that point, and consideration of the strategic framework that will be in place nationally at the time as well. So we're reflecting on that, as well as the lessons from semester 1, as we can consider further with the universities and the unions, NUS and public health experts our next steps. It is clear, however, that the return after the new year will not be normal, and we will work with the sector to offer as much clarity for students and staff as we can in the coming weeks. So to close, can I just say COVID-19 is a challenge for all of us, students included. We've all worked hard to support students in gaining an education this term, and like everyone else, we have learned and adapted as we have progressed. My message to students is thank you for all your efforts, and please keep doing all you can to keep yourself and others safe, if you are especially making plans to go home. Finally, I just want to reiterate my thanks to all the staff and students, the length and breadth of Scotland. I know it's been tough, but together we will get through this. Thank you.
Thank you. The Minister will now take questions on the issues raised in his statement. I intend to allow around 20 minutes for questions, after which we will move on to the next item of business. It would be helpful if members who wish to ask a question were to press the request to speak buttons now. And I call on Jamie Green.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I thank the Minister for advance sight of his statement and add my thanks to our further and higher education staff who are trying to deliver as near normal experience as they can in this difficult year. I do welcome the positive intention to get students back for Christmas. These benches have been calling for mass asymptomatic testing of students for many months now, so I am pleased that this forms an intrinsic part of the plans announced today. But in reality, 160,000 tests in a few short weeks is ambitious. That ambition must translate into reality. So let me ask some specific questions. Can the Minister guarantee that every student who wants a test will be able to access one, irrespective of their circumstance? And on testing, who will provide the tests? Who will physically administer the tests? And who will provide the results? Can the Minister guarantee that everyone who will have the 2 tests, they will have them early enough, so that if they test positive, they still have time to complete 14 days of isolation before Christmas, thus allowing them to get home if necessary? And let's avoid a repeat of this summer. When will clear plans and guidance for semester 2 be announced? Because as it stands, we're offering students the chance to go home with no idea if or when they will crucially be able to return to college or university. And that's something we must all strive towards. Thank you.
Minister.
I thank Jamie Green for his questions and the constructive way in which he asked them. Clearly, our absolute objective is to make sure that students can return home for Christmas, and therefore the timetable will have to reflect that, and that's what we're asking of the universities. And clearly, the tests that will be carried out will have to be carried out in time to allow that to happen, should any student need to self-isolate for 14 days. I can only assure Jamie Green that, like the UK government south of the border and the Welsh government and others, we're going to bust the gut to make this happen. We don't know the scale of the challenge exactly, because we don't know how many students are wanting to go home and how many will come forward and voluntarily seek a test. But we have an assurance from the universities they're up for this. We're going to work as closely as we can with them. In terms of who will deliver the actual tests, the universities will have the prime responsibility for that, and they're taking that on, that responsibility. But the UK government contractors will be working closely with them, as indeed will the Scottish Government's public health teams as well. So there's a programme board being set up at the moment which will take forward those plans. And we're working, as I said, closely with the other home nations, because we all face a similar situation here. And I'm confident we're going to do all we possibly can do to get through this and allow our students to return home for safely. And as for semester 2, as I said in my opening remarks, clearly, as we stand here in early November, we can't quite predict what the situation will be in January, but we are determined to give as much clarity as we can to students and ensure that our universities are giving clarity to students so they know what to expect when they come back after the new year. But as again I said, just to close, it will not be normal, and we will certainly do what's right for public health reasons, and that will be first and foremost in our minds, as well as taking into account other harms, but we'll have to look at where the virus is at that time.
Ian Gray.
And thanks to the Minister for early sight of his statement. We have been asking for some time for a plan for students being able to return safely home at Christmas, so the statement is very welcome. Indeed, the return of students to universities in September was one of the worst-handled episodes in this pandemic, with infection rates soaring and hundreds of students facing self-isolation in very difficult circumstances. So it is very good that we have a plan, and it is good that it is a four-nation plan given the movement across the United Kingdom. What is rather worrying is the lack of detail provided today. So can the Minister tell us when testing will actually begin, who will carry the cost of the tests, and whether he is recommending that all students should be tested before returning home? What is the staggered period of return home? In England, it is identified as a fixed window, 3rd to 9th December. What is it here? And finally, what additional support will be provided through universities and directly to individual students who cannot return home over Christmas because they are being asked to self-isolate, having tested positive?
Minister.
Thank you, Ingrid. I asked a number of questions there, and I'll do my best to answer them. Firstly, in terms of the cost, clearly we are part of a UK programme, and the UK Treasury hopefully will be covering the costs, but we're in discussions about that, and hopefully we'll get clarity in due course. In terms of recommendation to students, yes, absolutely. I recommend very strongly to all students who are considering going home for Christmas to voluntarily come forward and take advantage of the asymptomatic testing that will be made available to them. That's the best way to minimise the risk of transmission of the virus in Scotland and indeed elsewhere, and that would be the responsible thing to do. And I heard some students on the radio today who are taking a very, very responsible attitude to this and saw the clear benefits and welcomed this step forward. And I should say in response to Ian Gray that we're all in the same boat here, indeed across the whole of the UK, because this is new technology that's been piloted and the validation processes have been undertaken and taken forward. So it just so happens we're now at this stage where we can use asymptomatic testing in this fashion in our universities as part of a UK-wide pilot. And that's now why we face the challenge, but a challenge we're up for, of getting it in place in time to allow our students to go home safely.
Thank you. Succinct questions and answers, please. We are running a little behind time. I call Claire Adamson to be followed by Jamie Halcrow-Johnson.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Minister, you rightly recognise that for some care experienced students, student accommodation is their home. In addition, many international students and other students may decide not to travel home over Christmas for a variety of reasons. How will the Scottish Government ensure that further and higher education institutions take steps to protect these students' welfare and well-being over the winter break?
Minister.
I thank Claire Adams for her question, and she's absolutely correct. Actually, universities this year are expecting more students to stay on campus than previous years and not go home for Christmas, largely for the reasons that Claire Adams refers to in terms of international students, because of the challenges of travelling overseas and other reasons as well. But for care experienced students, universities, as I said before, is home. And that's why one of our 5 measures that I've referred to today is specifically ensuring that the universities work with us to deliver welfare support and care, and indeed an enjoyable Christmas and festive season at our universities and on our campuses. So we're speaking to the universities about that, and they're again saying they're putting extra measures in place because it's been a tough year for everyone, and therefore hopefully those extra measures will make a difference to students who find themselves unable or perhaps choosing not to go home.
Thank you. Jamie Halcrow-Johnson to be followed by Sandra White.
I'm pleased to see the Minister now recognises the potential value of asymptomatic testing of students, as my colleague Jamie Green says, something we called for and the Minister rejected ahead of the return of students to universities and the subsequent outbreaks. So does the Minister now accept that he was wrong to ignore introducing asymptomatic testing at an earlier stage? And can he also advise me how this new testing regime will work with NHS Scotland's Test and Protect app, and any estimates he has for the percentage of Scottish students who have the app operating on their phone?
Minister.
Thank you. The clinical governance will be worked up in the coming days in conjunction with colleagues across the home nations. And we're learning, as I said before, from the pilots that took place down south. I should say to Jamie Halcrow-Johnson 2 important points. Firstly, testing is just one part of the toolbox here. We cannot rely just on testing. It's a really important message to send out that this is not a panacea. It is not some sort of cure that's going to make it possible for everyone to stay safe and not be infected with coronavirus, but it's an important part of a package of measures. And the national advice that applies to everyone in Scotland, including students and the rest of us, is absolutely fundamental to keep ourselves safe. And that will be a strong message we'll be conveying to the student population in Scotland. That testing, yes, it's got a role to play, but the other measures you have to adopt are absolutely crucially important for keeping yourself safe. And in terms of Test and Protect, as I said before, the clinical governance that's been worked up this week will look at the relationship between Test and Protect and the new asymptomatic testing. The new test is a relatively new test. It is advanced. It gives a result within half an hour. So we're now in a position where we can take forward a pilot of asymptomatic testing. We weren't necessarily in that position before.
Sandra White, to be followed by Daniel Johnson.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Minister, I'm very pleased that we've got some clarity in regards to students going home at Christmas. But can I move on a wee bit further, and can I ask the Minister what safeguards will be in place to ensure we do not have a repeat of the rise in numbers of COVID-19 cases in the student population when they return to their campuses? Minister.
I thank Sandra White. Clearly, we have to learn the lessons from the new term last September and over October, when we had freshers coming to university and there was an issue with university halls and the outbreaks we saw there, which I absolutely understand caused a lot of distress for the students who were affected. And soured their experience of the first few weeks back at university for those that were affected. As I gave the statistics earlier on, things have dramatically improved. And of course, going back to university or college after New Year is quite different to going to your first Freshers' Week and your first time at university in September. So it's a different set of circumstances. But we absolutely will not be complacent. And of course, where we are just now with the virus, in terms of nationally, where we've seen a rise of cases since September, therefore that absolutely has to be taken into account in terms of how we approach the new year. And we'll continue to discuss that with student representatives and the institutions to give as much clarity as possible in good time for students to know what to expect after the new year.
Daniel Johnson, to be followed by Alison Johnson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The availability of testing to students this side of Christmas is welcome. Will the Minister take the opportunity now to commit to its ongoing availability into the second term after Christmas?
Minister.
Well, we'll, I'm sure, no doubt, learn a lot from asymptomatic testing in our universities and to some degree in our colleges for the end of this term. And we will continue to discuss the ongoing possibilities of asymptomatic testing and take advice from our clinical advisors and indeed the Health Secretary, who's just arrived in the chamber. So testing is advancing all the time. So we will continue to keep Parliament abreast of any future uses of asymptomatic testing.
Alison Johnson, to be followed by Willie Rennie.
The Green support for asymptomatic testing is well known, so I welcome today's announcement, but I am concerned about the lack of any plan for testing students before and as they return in January, because after 2 weeks of being scattered across the country, a return to halls could see exactly the same kind of outbreaks as we did 2 months ago. So when will the government be in a position to advise about testing arrangements that will be applied at the end of the Christmas break, similar to those the Minister has outlined for the start? And also, when will he be in a position to explain how this will be carried on an ongoing basis?
Minister.
Again, I just want to repeat the point that testing, asymptomatic testing, indeed any testing, is not a panacea. It plays a very important role, and it's really important that students and the rest of us recognise this is one part of a bigger series of measures that have to be adopted for people to keep themselves and others safe. And of course, we now are looking at the new possibilities of asymptomatic testing, especially for universities and the return after the new year. But we're discussing these matters with clinical colleagues and indeed the other administrations within the UK, and we'll do our best to keep Parliament updated. Of course, we're speaking just now in early November, and we're speaking about terms in January in the middle of a global pandemic. So it's not quite possible to predict exactly what the best solution will be at the moment.
Willie Rennie, to be followed by Emma Harper.
It's a shame that the government's been dragged into this position, because for months, parties right across this chamber have been asking for this to happen. And if it had happened earlier, we might not have been in the position earlier on this term in universities right across the country. But I just hope the Minister now recognises we shouldn't just do it before Christmas, we need to do it after Christmas as well. And we need that commitment today so he's not dragged here again to make it happen. We cannot afford students to be treated in the way they were earlier this year. Is the Minister going to commit to that?
Minister.
I know it's exceedingly unlikely, but should Willie Rennie ever find himself in government, he will find that he has to listen to the advice. He has to listen to the advice of his clinical advisors. And we listen to the scientific advice and the clinical advisor. We now have asymptomatic tests which are effective. And that's why the UK government, the Scottish government, the Welsh government and perhaps others are adopting asymptomatic testing and this particular test which has been piloted. So it plays a role, it's not a panacea, and it's not the solution for us all keeping ourselves safe in terms of our message to students. We've got to adopt the other advice as well. But yes, here we are, and things are advancing all the time. It's really important we take advantage of advancing science and technology.
Emma Harper, to be followed by Liz Smith.
Sir, the Minister said that the testing programme is a UK government programme. Can he just confirm for us whether the Treasury have agreed to meet the costs?
Minister.
Well, my understanding is this is something that's been considered by the Treasury because quite clear it's a UK programme and this is the Scottish allocation of the test kits and it's a UK programme that's working with our universities and the Scottish Government to deliver the asymptomatic testing. So it would be really, really helpful if the UK Treasury could respond positively soon and confirm that they are going to step in and cover the costs of this.
Liz Smith, to be followed by Bob Doris.
Ask for complete clarity from the Minister about his intentions for the testing that will follow beyond the Christmas break in terms of students coming back, many of them from other countries. What exactly are the intentions to test when students return from abroad?
Minister.
Well, as I said previously, we are of course looking at testing as part of the return after the New Year for students to our institutions, but we are concentrating at the moment on getting our students home safely for Christmas this term. And we have said we'll give as much notice as we can. And this is a similar position across the UK, can I say to Liz Smith, because of the circumstances we find ourselves in. That we'll give as much clarity as we can and as much notice. And we will ask universities to give as much clarity to the students of what to expect next term. And we're working on that at the moment.
Bob Doris, to be followed by Joanne Lamont.
Presiding Officer, many students will be making a decision to return home to stay with family this Christmas time based on a variety of factors, including financial ones. Can I ask the Minister to ensure that student hardship funds are adequate, that funds are suitably prioritised for those most in need, and that students are also aware that they can apply for the Scottish Welfare Fund in some circumstances?
Minister.
Yes, for many students, particularly those who have not been able to work due to the impact on the economy of COVID, it has been a tough time financially, and that's why the hardship funds and the additional hardship funds we brought forward a few months ago have been so valuable. In terms of the £11 million we brought forward for the university sector or higher education sector, that is largely available, although I'm waiting for an up-to-date report on how much of that's been used up. And likewise, we're paying close attention in further education in our colleges as to the call on their student hardship funds as well. So it's a very important issue, and I just want to assure the member we're keeping a very close eye on this.
Joanne Lamont, to be followed by Gail Rowe.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I just urge the Cabinet Secretary to give some detailed timescales for this, because young people and their families will be expecting them, not that you'll simply be looking at them at some point in the future. But can I clarify advice on travel? If a student is travelling from a level 3 area, say Glasgow, to a level 1 area, say Stornoway, is the general travel advice suspended for them? And what confidence can you give students who may be advised that they cannot travel till after a particular date, that if they wait, they will not be caught if levels assigned and particular areas or general travel advice change?
Minister.
In terms of the current travel guidance, there are exceptions and students would qualify for that in terms of going to education. But of course, our guidance is being updated to take into account the need for students to be able to return home for Christmas. And that's the purpose of today's announcement and indeed the announcements across the rest of the UK. And in terms of future arrangements, we will give as much notice as we can, albeit we face the uncertainty of being in the middle of a global pandemic, and it's not always easy in November to give advice of what the situation will be in January. But I do give the assurance to the member we are conscious of the need to allow families and students to know what may be around the corner in terms of the arrangements for returning to their institutions.
Final question, Gail Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. How ready are colleges and universities to provide learning online for those students that can't or don't want to return to halls or shared accommodation after the Christmas break?
Minister.
There has been a huge shift to online learning and teaching in our colleges and universities, but clearly there are some courses where that's not practicable, and that's kept the case for some level of face-to-face teaching over the past few months. But, you know, some universities in particular have shifted, you know, a huge amount of their teaching online. And of course, in terms of the plan for the safe return of students at Christmas, the end of face-to-face teaching is anticipated to give enough time for students to travel home should they have to self-isolate for 14 days before Christmas.
Thank you very much. That concludes questions on the statement. I thank members and I thank the Minister for enabling all the questions to be answered in the time allowed. We now move on.